Let's get into this story about Jameis Winston now. John McMullen at JF McMullen wrote about it at 97.3 ESPN.com, and it looks like, John, the Eagles will prosper. They will not have to face the star quarterback from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and it says he will not appeal this suspension. So take us through this whole story.
Well, and as you mentioned, it has a kind of an Eagles tint to it because Ronald Darby was in the Uber with Jameis Winston at least part of the time, or that was the claim, and Darby came to his defense. The two were teammates at Florida State together, been longtime friends. But, it's interesting. Jameis has a reputation, obviously, dating back to all the issues he had at Florida State. And the accusations from the Uber driver are what they are. I suppose the only people that really know are Jameis Winston and the driver. But what I can tell you is there's been no police charges. There was never a police investigation. The driver never took it that far. And the NFL is going to suspend the guy for 3 games. I'm not sure what this league is trying to accomplish. I don't know why they're intent on getting into the investigation business. But from the Eagles' standpoint, they play Tampa Bay week 2, and Jameis is going to be suspended, so you're probably going to see Ryan Fitzpatrick instead of Jameis Winston down in Tampa, and that's a positive.
Yeah, which, by the way, the Tampa Bay Times believes that Ryan Griffin has an opportunity to pass Ryan Fitzpatrick on the depth chart and start for the Buccaneers during Winston's 3-game suspension. No one's ever heard of him. The Eagles are potentially catching a huge break here. And per Adam Schefter, the league has, quote, still not notified Winston of its official decision, and the circumstances surrounding it could lead to an increase or decrease of the 3 games. So the ban is a result of Winston's alleged March 2016 groping of an Uber driver. Now, he was not charged with a crime in the incident, but it appears that the league is stepping in and doing something about it based on just the allegations.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that's a slope you want to go down, but the NFL is diving down it. And it's interesting. There's a lot of context that needs to be put into this. I mean, a lot of people will point to Ezekiel Elliott and say he fought as hard as he did before ultimately the courts decided he was going to have to serve a suspension last year. In Winston's case, though, people will jump to the conclusion that there are reports that he has agreed to the suspension already. And the reason why is because he's on the 4th year of his 5-year rookie deal. And his base salary is very low, about $700,000. So he would lose about $124,000 in this suspension. If he fights it and he gets a stay and is able to play the majority of the season and it gets kicked off to next year, well, the next year is his 5th-year deal. The next year he's scheduled to make $20.9 million. So all of a sudden, him losing 3 game checks turns into well over $3 million. So that's the reason he's going to accept the suspension, and people are going to claim that he's admitting guilt. It's not really that. I mean, it's the system. And precedent has said time and time again, the NFL has a right to do these things under the CBA. Ultimately, the league is going to win. So if you're Winston, what do you want to do? Give up $124,000 or $3.5 million?
John McMullen, well, it's simple math, I guess. John, how about the fact that Ronald Darby inserted himself into this whole he said, she said sort of disagreement? And do you think that reflects in some way for the Eagles' opinion of Ronald Darby?
I don't think so. But, could the NFL take a look into it and say he was lying? Hey, they can do whatever they want. I think they could suspend Mike Gill and Pete Thompson if they wanted to. So watch your P's and Q's. I think that's the bigger issue from the Eagles' standpoint. Do they take a look into it Do they believe, because generally if you use Uber, you have a GPS part of it, and it should be pretty aspect to it, and it should be pretty easy to see if Darby was actually in the car at any point. Ultimately, he could get in trouble from that standpoint.
Yeah, the attorney for the Uber driver has come out and said that Mr. Winston's friend from his FSU days is just making things worse by inserting himself into this.
Yeah, and that part, as I said, it should be very, very easy to investigate. And as far as if Darby was in the car or not, and he claims there were 3 passengers. Third passenger has never been named. The driver says it was only Winston and doesn't remember. It's a very strange story.
Was the driver drunk?
Let's hope not.
He doesn't remember.
She
doesn't remember there were other people in the car.
Now don't go down that path and say James. But yeah, well, according to her, Jameis was the only one in the car, and the groping incident happened at a Mexican restaurant in a drive-thru at about 2 a.m. So the speculation was that Jameis was obviously altered in an altered state, but let's hope the driver wasn't.
John, the list of alleged incidents with Jameis Winston in college is pretty long. Shooting at squirrels with a pellet gun, the crab legs is well known, jumping on the lunchroom table and screaming what he screamed. His college exploits were pretty well known. Is this the first time that he's run into trouble as a pro?
Yeah, basically. I mean,
and watching him from the year they were on Hard Knocks, I mean, he seemed like he was a pretty mature, and you know that he was clearly the face of that franchise, and that they were okay of having him be out there, and you know, he had the camps, he was working with the kids, all that. So he seemed like a pretty good dude.
Yeah, but obviously reality shows are heavily edited, so they can make things look the way they want to look. But there were a lot of questions, and that was the real concern about Jameis as the number 1 overall pick. All the issues he had at Florida State. Now, Pete just mentioned them all. He didn't mention the most serious, which was a rape allegation. As far as the others, look, I'm not going to kill a young kid for taking crab legs or being an idiot at a student union or even shooting at a squirrel, and I'm an animal lover. I mean, that stuff, let's be honest, that's not serious. But rape allegations and sexual assault allegations, those are serious. And those obviously have to be taken seriously. And the NFL seems to be taking this issue more seriously than anybody else, because as you mentioned, nobody really went down the road to ask for charges, and obviously the police didn't investigate.
And by the way, John, Ronald Darby was involved in that too. He and Chris Casher had to go to a code of conduct hearing in May of 2014 because they were alleged witnesses to this encounter back between the quarterback and the woman that you're talking about, and they showed up, but Winston didn't show up.
Yeah, and there's a lot of sort of back and forth with that particular case. It wasn't obviously anything that was strong enough to go to actual charges from a legal standpoint, and there was a civil case, and so there's a lot of sort of dirty laundry, and Ronald Darby, as you mentioned, was also involved in that. So there's a history that maybe some people are saying, hey, Ronald, you might want to stop hanging out with Jameis Winston, but friends are friends. And ultimately, I think from the Eagles' standpoint, more so that Ronald is on the final year of his rookie deal, and he's probably going to get a lot of money as an above-average cornerback in this league. I think that might be the bigger issue for them moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I know he missed a lot of time last year, and I don't know how much you dealt with Ronald, but does he seem like an immature guy?
Well, I mean, he's a young guy. I think there's a lot. I mean, I think if you talk about people in their early 20s, whether they're playing NFL football or not. I think there's a lot of maturity issues. But no, I don't. If you're asking me if it's more than someone else, no. He seems like a pretty grounded guy. He's a nice guy.
Mm-hmm.
He goes about his job in a professional way. He's not the most outspoken guy. I don't think he's terribly comfortable talking to the media a lot, but I wouldn't say he's negative or in that way. I don't think it's that he doesn't want to deal with people. I think it's more that he's just uncomfortable with it.
John McMullen at JF McMullen here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. A lot of other interesting NFL stories, one of which involves Gene Steratore. I think this story is pretty interesting. Now, he retired from the league today, right? He put his retirement in.
Number 4.
Right.
You guys want to referee a game?
Right. Well, my point is, and I find this to be interesting because I'm thinking to myself as I see another network hired some guy, and ESPN just hired a guy.
Jeff Triplett and Terry McAuliffe.
Okay, so Terry McAuliffe got hired. Jeff Triplett got hired. I got to imagine that they are getting paid just about the same as what a referee would make. All these guys are probably kicking on the network's doors to get those jobs.
Yeah, I mean, those are good jobs to have, and they're easier jobs to have, unless you're Mike Carey, who was just really, really bad at it. But, yeah, I think that's always a goal, but there's only so many to go around, obviously. I think the bigger issue...
But if you're a high-profile guy like Steratore, don't you think the networks would say...
Steratore and Ed Hockley.
If you know who
if
you know who the official is, if you know his name, then that guy is probably going to be sought after.
Yeah, and Ed's probably the most well-known, and he didn't get it, so it's probably because he didn't want it. But I think the bigger issue here is the move away from part-time to full-time. These guys have all been double-dipping for years and years and years, and many of them, Hockley being, at the top of that list as a lawyer, they're making a lot of money. And it's the best part-time job in the world. And now all of a sudden they're said, hey, you got to do this full-time. I think that's the reason for the exodus.
John, do you also think, too, I mean, now that the rules are about to change, these are all the old school guys, too, and we get into this targeting rule and what is targeting, and they just look at it and say, with that combined with the part-time versus you want as full-time, you know how the rules changed between basically the start of the season last year to what Gene Steratore had to call in the Super Bowl and the way they had changed some ideas of what's a catch and what's not a catch. Is it just also a matter of these old school guys going, you know what, that's it. Okay, I'm out.
Yeah, I think it's part of it, but I don't think it's the change of the rules. I think it's how difficult they've made their job with the over legislation. I've talked about that with Mike a lot, and they're the ones who get criticized. And by and large, they're doing what they're told to do by the league, and they're doing their jobs, and in most cases they do it pretty well. But they're the ones on the front line that gets criticized because the fans don't like the rules, and they blame the officials for enforcing the rules. And there's sort of a disconnect. And they say, oh, that's a terrible call. It's not really a terrible call. It's a terrible rule that they've been told to call. And I think that's their frustration. I think that's a bigger issue for the guys that are leaving.
It's interesting because as I look up Terry McAuliffe and the rumor that he's going to go to NBC Sunday Night Football, there's names out there, including my guy that I know, Clete Blakeman, who auditioned for the job and did not get it. Like Blakeman would have retired or resigned if he got that job. But this exodus of Triplett and McAuliffe, could you say that the refereeing position is going to be more important than ever, both the catch rule, the kickoff formation, all the targeting that I talked about? I mean, they're going to be under the spotlight for sure this upcoming season.
Well, I think there can be good and bad to it. The good could be you can now sort of develop guys from scratch with the new rules as opposed to, teaching the old dog new tricks, which may be more difficult. And I've always thought the league should probably get younger, not just with referees, but with all officials. If you think about guys, 255 pounds running 4.4s, and you have middle-aged men trying to keep up with them, it doesn't make a lot of sense from that aspect of it. So maybe this can start a change and sort of a developmental system where they can get the officials they want, and that's a positive. Negative is obviously you lost a ton of experience, and other than Jeff Triplett, who I don't think anybody liked, no offense to Jeff, he just didn't do a very good job, but I thought the two best referees in football were Ed Hockley and Gene Steratore, and they're both gone. And that's not good.
Yeah, and that leads into my next question. With all those guys retiring, where do they get that next generation of zebras from? Is it college football exclusively? I mean, what's their evaluation process for potential guys?
Yeah, I mean, they've been doing that for a while. There are guys. I mean, they've already promoted 3 referees, and now they'll do a 4th. So they have guys in the pipeline, and obviously they're lesser officials who get promoted. But yeah, they've taken from the college ranks, and they now have a sort of a given force with the CFL, and they do place more officials at practices and things like OTAs. So they have made a lot of improvements as far as that goes. And I've always said the full-time aspect of it is long overdue. And repetition, just like players, it makes them better. So hopefully all that comes to fruition.
John McMullen here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, talking a little football with us. Of course, you can follow John on Twitter at JFMcMullen. Read his national column at getmoresports.com. And, of course, all of his stuff right here on 97.3 ESPN.com. John, have a good weekend, man.
You too, guys.